Hello. Thank you all for sticking out for the end. I am really excited about this panel because it's about mental health, and we have two fantastic speakers who are doing such great work in this area. So first of all, thank you both. Mental health is a topic that is becoming an emerging buzzword topic among every industry because it's something that impacts all of us. Each and every one of us is somehow affected by mental health, whether it's your own struggle, someone in your life, could affect you personally, could make it all the way to the workplace, but it is a very important topic for us to spotlight. And I personally have experienced mental health issues throughout most of my adult life. Been struggling with anxiety and depression, and I'm very open about talking about it, in part to show others that it's okay not to be okay, and then also just so we can normalize conversations about mental health. And that's exactly what the gambling industry needs to be doing too. We need to be normalizing conversations around mental health. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be giving mental health the airtime it deserves when it comes to gambling. So we're going to start very high level. Brianne, why are we even talking about this? What is the importance of mental health when it comes to gambling?
Talk about opening Pandora's box, right? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here talking about this because mental health impacts the way that we think, the way that we feel, and it really transcends into all the decisions that we make, right? Whether you have an issue, whether you don't, mental health impacts all of us. And nobody ever balks when you choose the salad over the cheeseburger, right? We have no qualms about talking about taking pride and ownership and our physical well-being. So where's the hang-up here? Why is it so taboo to talk about mental health? Or why do we have to have 30 minutes? Why is this not commonplace? And then unpacking it a little bit more, how does that relate to gambling? Well, when we talk about gambling disorder or problem gambling, we actually know that the greatest amount of shame and stigma exists in that one addiction. And then when we juxtapose that to the rates of suicidal ideations or that it negatively impacts 8 to 10 other people, I can't think about why we're not talking about it more. Because obviously this is an issue that deserves a lot more time and attention, and how all of those pieces of data impact the way people are thinking, feeling, and acting, both with the gambling itself and the policies that drive the gambling.
Thank you.
It's also a topic that the younger generation is really keen on understanding more of and having integrated in almost everything that they're doing when they're thinking about employment to the products that they choose. And I think the quicker that we continue to drive the conversation around mental health as it relates to the gambling community, the faster we're actually going to get to some solutions that make sense for folks who are reaching out for care or want to reach out for care. Some of the things that we see, we created Kindbridge Behavioral Health in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And some of the things that I think are interesting lessons to take away that we've learned so far are really 4 contributing factors when we see individuals with a gambling problem come through the door. So the first thing is levels of insomnia. They're off the charts. It's number 1 by far and away. Number 2 is anxiety. Number 3 is depression. And number 4 is irritability. And when these 4 things have a tendency to manifest at once, it often comes out in anger, bursts of massive emotion, and damage can be done very quickly. So I think when we're talking about lessons learned that come across from mental health, I think these are the types of things that we need to have conversations around sooner rather than later and more continuous and sustainably. And really just sort of drive the point home that this is a conversation everybody wants to be having because everybody wants to understand this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's such a good point that this is a conversation that I think people want to be having.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that it's hard to have, especially where we are when it comes to talking about problem gambling, responsible gambling. Mental health is still very taboo in this industry. And I know you all talk to so many people in the industry all the time. What are people saying behind closed doors when it comes to mental health? What do those conversations look like?
They want to understand more about how to integrate it and really how does it apply, I think is a very common question that I get a lot of, which is around the roots of like, well, where do we reach out? How do we know when to make some sort of intervention or put something in front of somebody? Like, what are the telltale signs? Like, or if it's, if they're not using the RG tools, do we get them to use the RG tools? Like there's a genuine curiosity around like what is the order of operations when it comes to how do we start discussing this topic. And I think the more guidance that we can give with the more that we learn along the way, the better off everybody is. Like with what we've got going on now with BetMGM and DraftKings, it's like really the first real opportunity to do some population level analysis on a good size of individuals that are coming through that are actually looking for care specifically for this problem, that we can then turn around and start to inform processes in the way that we think about integrating care sooner for individuals and what different access points look like.
Sure. So I think about it a little bit differently. So I think that there's a keen interest in, ooh, you're talking to me about mental health. Wow, that's an easier pill to swallow. Doesn't that sound better than gambling addiction? Ooh, I can sell mental health in my site. Yeah. And so there's a keenness to understand the intersection of mental health, problem gambling, responsible gaming. Yeah. I think that the problem by and large is the way that the industry is talking about it. Whether it's intentional or not, there's still a tremendous amount of stigmatizing language that is happening in all of these discussions. From the placement of the RG tools, to the way they're presented in the user experience, to the language that influencers are using on social platforms. I don't believe that any of it is done with malice or ill intent, and maybe even a true appreciation for how serious the stigma is getting promoted. But when you use things like mental health, given the scenario of just general U.S. interest in this, I think people are willing to have a more candid dialogue around what are our RG tools, are we deploying them effectively, but I think there's still, by and large, I'm going to say the quiet part out loud, that RG tools will prevent revenue. RG tools are going to prevent play, and that's scary for a lot of people right now.
How do you help companies balance that? That is maybe the $1 million question here.
Sorry, repeat that.
How do you balance that? How do we advise the industry how to balance player protection with revenue? We've got the magic sauce, right, Dan? No.
It's a tricky conversation to have pretty much at all times. But is this a good point to bring up Saturday Night Live and this?
Yeah, I knew it. He's just been dying to bring it up, you guys. He's like, SNL, let's do it.
I think the reality is there has to be an open and honest conversation about what it is that the people who are on the platforms playing and showing up in the casinos are dealing with. It's not really a hidden statistic. In this country, there is a lot of mental health issues. It is well known that we are dealing with mental health crises all over the place. So again, I kind of come back to the way that you talk about it and acknowledge it is going to be the destigmatizing point when you get the language right.
Completely.
Right. And really, when you look at what happened with Saturday Night Live, which frankly was one of the most interesting sort of microcosms that I've seen when it comes to RG and PG, you ended up with 2 million views on YouTube within a 9-day period or something like that of really what is some very clever language used around getting somebody to talk about the problem, right? And then I got a load of input from operators, from care providers. There was some sensitivities that were effective one way or the other, and I think the difference is the stickiness there, and it sparks the conversation, and it makes it okay to talk about it, right? I think when we think about messaging that goes out, we have to be sending out messaging that sparks the conversation, sticks around, and makes it okay to talk about it and acknowledge what's going on.
So we were talking a lot about this, right? And satire and laughter are some of the best medicine that we can have, right? Talk about shattering barriers to make a very uncomfortable conversation happen. On the other hand, imagine being that degenerate. Imagine a scenario that you're that person experiencing harm. And now that satire is basically like your friend is going to bet on your demise. Sure, it's kind of funny. I mean, we can literally find everything possible to bet on this country now. But are we really in a position where we want people feeling like your mass destruction is something I want to gamble on?
Sure.
If I am in my darkest of days and the worst of times, do I really want to feel like my friends want to make some cash on that? Yes, I get it. It was a joke. But the truth is that person needs to feel supported. Like, Dan, I'm struggling right now. You're going to try and build me up, not take a bet on me. I think that in some ways the satire hits so close to home that the people that I talk to and have the pleasure of working with and representing, the people who are in the throes of a hidden addiction, pretty much were really insecure. Do I really think my friends are going to make a wager on this?
I think it also depends on what you do with it. Like, that is a starting point to a great conversation you could have. Do you hide from it and say that's not the reality of the situation, or do you embrace it and use it as an opportunity to actually talk more about this?
Absolutely. I think, like, also just to make this note, the demographic that SNL appeals to is, there's a huge amount of them that are parents. Like, it's, you know, they're sort of like our age, right? You know?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we saw as almost like a direct response to it was the amount of parents that were reaching out almost immediately that wanted to just have a conversation about what they see in their kids' behaviors, right? Which was very intriguing, because like that's a great way to start a conversation and have somebody who cares about you carry that conversation forward, right? And so like that was very interesting to see, because it was almost immediate, and
That's
it was
so good to hear.
Yeah.
And mental health is one of the few topics that we can actually do something about by just talking about it. It's like lip service actually is productive, which is refreshing. But like Dan said, it's no secret that our country has a mental health crisis. But we're making progress. And we're making progress in part because we're actively working to destigmatize it. Like if I thought that 5 years ago I'd sit on a panel and tell 100 strangers about my depression, I'd think I was crazy. But that is remarkable that I can do that now, because we're making it okay to have these conversations and make it okay to have conversations in these settings. So I think this is a huge topic. The reason we're talking about this is how can we look to the successes and how we are destigmatizing mental health issues writ large and bring those into the problem gambling space.
I think that right now, when it comes to problem gambling, that's a lot misunderstood. There are a lot of beliefs that this is still a moral failure, that someone can just stop, that it was a flaw in their character that led them to this. It's simply a money problem. I mean, I'll give an interesting story, and by interesting, I mean it's a cringe one. So it's no secret to many of you in this room, I'm one of the few lobbyists that go from state to state and the federal government pushing for more awareness around problem gambling. And I walked into a speaker's office for a state that I will not name, and he told me that if the people that I was there representing had just read the Bible, that the addiction would go away. And to thank you very much and to have a good day. This is kind of what our nation is still trying to grapple with. What is this thing? It wasn't until 2013 that we actually put a label of an addiction attached to it, right? In the terms of addiction policy, it's still very much a baby. And people say, substance misuse, alcohol, it has all of these programs. Like, why not gambling? Well, because it's still a baby. And there's so much that's tied to it. People have certain beliefs, misinformation. There's just simply a lack of real good information about this. And the industry can be a conduit to kind of change that narrative.
Absolutely. I would love to hear from one of you about the impact of this stigma. What harm is it actually doing? Is it impacting regulation? Is it preventing funding? How do you measure the amount of harm that we're doing by not talking about problem gambling as the serious entity, mental health crisis it is?
The the way that the industry talks about it, or the way that it's like perceived in the public? Where do we want to hit?
Why not both?
I was just going to say she's going to answer both.
I mean, the fact of the matter, like from where I sit, is there has to be enough overwhelming data to inform the way that we talk about the subject. And I think I get a real mix of operators that want to sort of charge forward, lead from the front, take ownership of the fact that, they know that a portion of their population is dealing with these problems, get the right tools in place, and, do the right thing. And then it's like working out the mechanics of how to make all of that happen. And then you get other operators who really just sort of look at the subject still in a way that it's like, well, the money's got to come out of somewhere, and it's not necessarily something that's going to be like revenue generating for me, so I don't want to take this that far yet until regulators get involved with it. And so you kind of get like this real mixed bag. But like what I have seen in the last 18 months or so, I'm seeing more of them wanting to do more and fewer of them wanting to just sort of stay at what the minimum requirement is, if that makes sense. But I still see like there's a real need to educate, like how do you talk about this without it being extremely polarizing, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, go ahead, you.
I don't think polarizing is necessarily the worst thing, right? I think balanced debate is really important here. And, Stigma has had a real impact on a multitude of things that have impacted the ecosystem. So a few examples. The average man can go upwards of 20 years of experiencing different degrees of harm before he might reach out for help. 20 years. No wonder we have to account for the social things like bankruptcy and divorce and crime. So stigma is an inhibitor into treatment or to even talking to someone of, hey, I think I have a problem. From the policy aspect, stigma has kept things like funding from in bills because it's a moral failure, right? So why do I have to fund that? If you just find your Bible, it's not going to be a problem. So I'm not going to put money to that. Because people don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to regulate it. It's pretty much absent in a lot of regulations, or it's super broad, right? My favorite problem gambling policies are the ads will not target vulnerable populations. Sure, cool, that billboard, absolutely. It's targeting who, how are we defining that? We're not talking about it and seeing a lot of production because there's stigma. Who wants to be the person in the room in a gaming commission that's like, hi, yeah, I have a question about this, right? Stigma is keeping us from having not only enough discussions, but productive ones at that.
It's so important to talk about how to talk about it, but it's also so important to first just talk about it. Yeah. And I'm a communication strategist. So much of what I do is trying to make sure you're finding the messages that resonate with your right audience, but also looking at when you're using certain terms, what are you actually conveying? And when the media or policymaker or regulator is asking about gambling addiction or problem gambling, and then you respond with like, we take responsible gaming really seriously, you're sending a message about what you're actually caring about. Yeah. So even being comfortable saying problem gambling is going to help destigmatize it, because anytime someone brings up problem gambling and then you're just saying responsible gaming, you're saying it's not okay to talk about problem gambling.
True. Really happy to hear you say that. An hour ago, I went on the record with a reporter and said, the thing that irks me the most about Problem Gambling Awareness Month is when everybody tells me about their responsible gaming tools. Cool. Yeah. I mean, yes, responsible gaming tools are important, and yes, they are for everyone, and yes, they're designed to help prevent people from struggling with the problem. But let's talk about those that have suffered harm. Let's talk about, are we doing enough in markets to make sure that help and hope exist? How is it that we have 9 states that are still doing nothing? There's no clinician, there's no help, you're not getting anything if you're struggling. How is it that there are only 2 states without legalized gambling, yet it's okay that 9 states don't have any problem gambling services? Let's talk about that as an industry. Let's strive to do a little bit better.
I mean, I go a step farther, and even, some of the some of the problem gambling solutions that I see out there, there's just no real cohesiveness as they, like going to a health system and training 15 clinicians and then saying, tick, I did a good job. There's 15 clinicians in the state that understand. Like they have to practice on the population, right? Like they have to get to understand the population in order to be able to actually build rapport, therapeutic alliance, get on the same page with the client as fast as possible, and help them be successful in the care journey. And I like just one of the things that has just been, it makes my skin crawl on this subject is that like when I think about system level solutions, training everybody just isn't, it can't be the only approach, right? So, stringing things together that create healthcare, like look at healthcare like a center of excellence. Like somebody comes in, they say they have a gambling issue. We go through a whole battery of psychological assessments with the individual, find other comorbidities, co-occurring addictions that are live and present with the person, and then you start organizing care based off of what you see as a whole person. Right, and until we kind of recognize that healthcare can organize and utilize telehealth in a very efficient and effective way to manage disease, that's sort of like where I really need to see this go, if that makes sense. Right?
So I know everybody's playing games on their phones, right? Why not get access to mental health treatment on your phone?
There's such an opportunity. What you were saying about people not using tools remind me of the line from Rock Bottom Kings about like it's someone else's problem. There are so many people who think that those tools are for other people, and looking at mental health, it kind of reminds me of how some people think that therapy or couples counseling are only for people who like really have problems. But there's this middle ground here, like it's for everyone to like prevent you from getting there. And I don't know if anyone sees those memes online that's just like when you're in your 30s and 40s. The morning after a party, someone's like, here's the soup recipe I was referring to. I feel that way sometimes when I'm just like, here's that therapist I was referring to. It's just like going to therapy doesn't mean you have a really bad problem. Just like using a responsible gambling tool doesn't mean you're an addict.
It's true.
It means that you want to keep your gaming safe and sustainable, and it's for everybody. I always talk about the seatbelt, right? We all get in the car, and what do? Put on our seatbelt. We don't intend to get in an accident. Nobody's going for the accident. We are making sure that if it happens, there's some kind of check there. That's what an RG tool is supposed to be for. The problem is it's kind of stigmatizing when you make it 20 clicks away in a different font, in a different color. They're behavioral nudges. All of that thing is a signal to the brain. And imagine, I just told you it has the highest rates of shame and stigma. Who wants to be like, well, if I think that tool is for someone with a gambling problem, yes, I'd like to identify as that, please, because that sounds great. No. The way we're talking about it, the way we're framing it, the way we're offering it right now, it's not working.
No, so much opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's no secret, March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So a question for both of you to close. What lessons do you want our audience to take back to their companies about mental health going into Mental Health Awareness Month?
Well, I mean, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, it's all around you. You're pretty much ingrained in it. Your employees are thinking about it. Your customers are thinking about it. Governments are organizing to try to help on a bunch of different fronts, from epidemics to opioid crises to all of these things. Like, it is a very dominant conversation that's going on in the healthcare field, and will continue to go on in the healthcare field for a long, long time until we see some improvement on some of the unfortunate rates of people dying by suicide. And it's just going to keep amplifying and getting bigger and bigger as part of our culture. Right. And I think like this is an opportunity right now, especially for the industry, to really sort of lean into this conversation and also recognize that it can help. Right. Like it can really help tackle a lot of these issues that we're seeing in the health system that aren't necessarily even gambling related, but just talking about healthcare. Right. Just talking about mental health. Just driving this conversation and continuously, repetitiously, sustainably talking about this inside of your organization is going to do a lot for the long-term benefit of the country.
You started off by saying it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
I do thousands upon thousands of trainings all over the world about this topic, and I always end saying this: take care of one another. It's about creating a culture of safety and wellness, and it can start with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. And thank you guys.
Thank you.